She sat across from me after dinner, her eyes steady and gentle, and in the quiet she whispered words that would change everything. "You're not alone anymore." The evening had ended with warmth and chatter, yet the moment the plates were cleared and footsteps faded into other rooms, the house took on an entirely different tone. It was the kind of quiet that almost hummed, broken only by the faint clinking of dishes being washed in the kitchen and the soft tick of a clock on the wall. The scent of roasted chicken and herbs still lingered in the air, mingling with the faint sweetness of wine left in half-finished glasses. I sat on the edge of the living room sofa, my hands loosely clasped, feeling like I should stand and leave, yet not quite ready to. The laughter I'd shared at the table now echoed like something distant, and in its absence, that familiar hollowness crept back in. I often felt this way, like an afterthought in the gathering, someone who slipped into silence while the rest of the family carried on with a rhythm I didn't fully belong to. The lamplight in the corner cast a warm but solitary glow, stretching shadows across the rug. I leaned back, trying to look casual, though inside I felt the edges of loneliness pressing in. That's when she appeared. My sister-in-law stepped softly into the room, not announcing herself, not filling the space with noise. She just walked in with the kind of grace that made the silence feel less heavy. Her presence was quiet, yet magnetic, drawing my attention without effort. She carried herself in a way that suggested she was both comfortable and aware, as if she understood the quietness in me and was not put off by it. She didn't speak immediately. Instead, she lowered herself onto the armchair beside the sofa, crossing her legs slowly, smoothing the fabric of her dress without a glance. The motion itself seemed deliberate, almost like she was giving me time to adjust to her nearness. I caught the faintest trace of her perfume, something subtle and floral, softened by the day's end, and felt a small, unexpected steadiness in the air. In that first quiet minute, she didn't try to break the silence. She simply sat there, her posture relaxed, her attention loosely angled toward me. It was a small thing, but it felt like an invitation, not to perform or impress, but simply to exist in the same space. The warmth of the room shifted then, as though her presence altered the very air. My loneliness was still there, but it no longer pressed down with the same weight. And without her saying a single word, I realized something. She had noticed. She was the one to break the silence first, though not in a way that shattered the calm. Her voice came soft, almost casual, as if she were picking up a thread of conversation left unfinished at the dinner table. "So," she said, tilting her head slightly, "how are your classes going this semester?" It wasn't the question itself that caught me off guard, but the way she asked it. Her tone wasn't perfunctory or polite, it was steady, warm, and patient, as though she actually wanted to hear the real answer and not just a rehearsed reply. I shifted slightly on the sofa, feeling the tension in my shoulders loosen. "There, all right," I said with a shrug, though even to my own ears the words sounded guarded. Her eyes lingered on me, soft but searching. She gave a small nod, as if acknowledging that my answer only skimmed the surface. "All right," she repeated gently, her lips curving in a faint smile. Then, leaning back in her chair, she added, "That doesn't sound like the whole story." I found myself chuckling, low and short, more from surprise than amusement. She had a way of cutting through to the spaces I usually kept hidden. For a moment, I didn't answer, just studied her posture, the way she leaned slightly toward me, elbow resting on the arm of the chair, her fingers idly brushing against the edge of the cushion as though she were entirely at ease. The air between us shifted. It wasn't heavy or probing, but I felt a pull to be honest. "It's just, a lot sometimes," I admitted. "Work, classes, trying to figure out what's next. I don't always feel like I'm keeping up." She nodded slowly, her gaze steady, and I noticed the subtle lift of her brows, the kind of expression that carried understanding rather than judgment. "That makes sense," she said softly. "It really does." The room felt warmer then, not because of the lamp or the leftover heat from dinner, but because of the way she made space for me in the conversation. She wasn't distracted, wasn't half listening. Every detail of her focus, the gentle tilt of her head, the calm in her voice, even the way her sleeve brushed softly against the chair as she shifted, told me I had her full attention. Her presence filled the room in a way that eased something inside me. For the first time that evening, I felt seen, not as an afterthought, not as someone fading into the background, but as someone worth pausing for. Our words began to wander, the way they often do when no one is rushing to fill the silence. She shifted in her chair, tucking one leg beneath the other, and glanced toward the window where the night pressed softly against the glass. Her voice lowered, as though sharing something not meant for anyone else. "You know," she said, a small smile tugging at her lips, "when I first joined this family, I felt like I didn't belong either. Everyone had their stories, their inside jokes, and I was just trying not to trip over myself." Her admission caught me by surprise. I had always seen her as entirely at ease, confident, graceful, someone who seemed to slip naturally into every moment. The idea that she had once felt like an outsider felt almost impossible, and yet, the vulnerability in her voice was unmistakable. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, watching her carefully. "Really?" I asked, almost incredulous. She nodded, her eyes catching mine for a long moment before drifting away again, as if looking back at those early memories. "I used to sit at the table and feel like I was extra. Like if I disappeared, no one would notice." She laughed softly then, though it wasn't a sound of humor, more a way of softening the truth she had just laid bare. Her words struck something deep in me. "That's exactly how I feel sometimes," I admitted before I could stop myself. My voice came quieter than I intended. "Like an extra chair at the table. Like I'm there, but not really part of it." The silence that followed was different this time. Not awkward, not empty, but thoughtful. Heavy with meaning. I looked down at my hands, unsure whether I had revealed too much, but when I glanced back up, her eyes were on me. They were softer now, almost luminous in the lamplight, carrying a quiet understanding that made my chest ache. She didn't rush to fill the space or cover it with reassurance. Instead, she let the truth hang between us, respected and unjudged. I could feel the steadiness of her attention like a hand on my shoulder, anchoring me. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel foolish for admitting it. In fact, I felt a strange kind of relief, as though she had carved out a space where I could finally breathe. That night, in that dimly lit room, it became clear, we were both familiar with the weight of feeling unseen. And in that recognition, something unspoken bound us closer. The conversation drifted into quiet again, not because there was nothing left to say, but because the silence itself felt meaningful. I leaned back against the sofa, my mind replaying her words, the way she had confessed to feeling like an outsider too. It left me oddly comforted, as if I wasn't standing on that lonely island by myself anymore. She shifted in her chair, turning slightly toward me. The soft fabric of her dress brushed faintly as she moved, and in that small motion, she seemed to close the space between us without even rising. Her eyes met mine again, steady and thoughtful. For a long breath, she just looked at me, not searching for words, not filling the gap, just looking. And then, with a quiet certainty that made the world around me seem to still, she reached out. Her hand came to rest on my forearm, fingers light at first, as though testing whether I would pull away. The warmth of her touch seeped through my sleeve almost instantly, spreading a calmness that felt foreign and yet deeply needed. Her thumb brushed once, a small, absent gesture, but enough to make my chest tighten. It wasn't dramatic or forced, it was the kind of touch someone gives when they want to steady you, when words alone aren't enough. My breath caught, though I tried not to show it. I looked down at her hand resting against me. Her nails were neat, her skin smooth, and the pressure was gentle yet grounding. That simple connection carried more weight than anything she could have said in that moment. I hadn't realized how starved I was for that kind of closeness until I felt it. When I lifted my gaze, she was still watching me, her expression soft, her lips curved just slightly, not a full smile, but something between reassurance and quiet understanding. I didn't know how long her hand lingered there, but time seemed to bend around the gesture. I wanted to hold on to the feeling, the warmth, the steadiness, the rare certainty that someone had noticed me enough to reach across the distance. And then, as naturally as she had placed it, she let her hand slide away, her fingers grazing my sleeve before retreating. The air seemed cooler in its absence, but the imprint of that touch stayed with me, alive beneath my skin. It was such a small moment, and yet it felt monumental. Because in that touch, she had said more than words could carry, "I see you. I'm here." The room was still, the kind of stillness that makes every detail louder, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the muted chatter of voices drifting from the other end of the house, the soft rhythm of my own breathing. Her hand had only just slipped away from my arm, yet the warmth it left behind lingered stubbornly, as though it had marked me. I found myself staring at the floor, then at my own hands, unsure what expression I wore. A part of me wanted her to reach for me again, to let her touch remind me that the loneliness pressing on my chest didn't have to be permanent. But another part recoiled at the thought, not because I didn't want it, but because I wasn't sure if I was supposed to. When I glanced back at her, my eyes caught a flicker of light glinting off the band of metal around her finger. The wedding ring. It caught the lamplight in a way I couldn't ignore, as though the universe itself wanted to remind me of the lines that should not be crossed. I shifted, leaning back into the sofa cushions, trying to put a little space between us. She noticed, of course she noticed. She always seemed to notice. For a moment, her brows lifted slightly, the faintest sign of awareness, before her expression softened again. "You don't have to explain," she said quietly, her voice carrying that calm steadiness I was beginning to recognize as her gift. "I can see it on your face." Her words made me flush, not with embarrassment exactly, but with the sharp awareness that she had read me so easily. I wasn't used to someone seeing through the surface. I tried to speak, but my throat felt thick, so instead I offered a half-smile, hoping it would mask the conflict twisting in me. She tilted her head gently, her gaze holding mine for longer than was comfortable, yet I didn't look away. "You're easier to talk to than most people," she said, almost as though confessing something she hadn't planned to. The admission hung between us, delicate but undeniable. The air grew tighter with that sentence, charged with something neither of us named aloud. My heart thudded against my ribs, not in panic, but in recognition, of a closeness that was building, of boundaries that were becoming blurred. I didn't move, didn't speak. All I could do was sit there, suspended between what was safe and what I secretly wished could be, wondering which side of that line we were slowly drifting toward. The silence between us stretched, not empty but full, like a chord held in the air long after the note has been played. I could hear the faint creak of the house settling, the low murmur of the family still moving around in distant rooms, but here in the living room, it felt as if the two of us were set apart in a pocket of stillness. She hadn't moved closer, but I could feel the weight of her presence as though she had. Her gaze was steady, warm, and unflinching, and it pinned me gently in place. I wanted to look away, to protect myself from how exposed I suddenly felt, but something in her eyes made me stay. I swallowed hard, trying to clear the knot in my throat. My chest felt tight, pulled in two directions, the longing for connection and the fear of what it might mean to take it. She must have seen all of that flickering across my face, because her lips curved in the smallest, most knowing smile. Then she spoke. Her voice was low, deliberate, each word carrying a weight that went far beyond the syllables. "You're not alone anymore." The sentence hung in the air, soft but unshakable. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard, because something inside me resisted believing it. But then her tone sank deeper into me, resonating like a note that finds the hollow space it was meant to fill. My breath hitched. I hadn't even realized I was holding it until it escaped in a rush, leaving me lightheaded. Heat stung at the corners of my eyes, a warning of tears I wasn't willing to let fall. I blinked quickly, trying to steady myself, but it didn't matter, she had already seen. Her words wrapped around the ache in my chest with a gentleness that nearly undid me. I felt the world narrow to the lamplit space we shared, to the hum of her voice, to the unshaken way she held my gaze as though nothing about what she had said was uncertain. For so long, I had carried the quiet belief that I was invisible, even in the midst of family. And yet, in that moment, she shattered the story I had been telling myself. You're not alone anymore. It wasn't a promise of more than she could give. It wasn't reckless or careless. It was steady, grounding, a lifeline cast across the space between us. And the moment those words touched me, I knew, she had given me something I had been silently craving for far too long, the right to believe I mattered. For a while, neither of us spoke. Her words still echoed in the quiet, soft, steady, and impossibly certain. You're not alone anymore. They lingered like the faint sweetness of perfume in the air, impossible to ignore even if I had wanted to. I sat there with my hands clasped loosely together, trying to process the way something inside me had shifted. The weight I carried, that quiet sense of being unseen, felt lighter, as if she had lifted part of it simply by naming it. And yet, the moment was delicate, as though even a careless breath might scatter it. She moved first. Not away, but closer. With a grace that seemed effortless, she leaned just slightly toward me until her shoulder nearly brushed mine. Then, after a pause long enough to feel intentional, she let her head rest lightly against my shoulder. The contact was gentle, almost tentative, but the effect was immediate. I felt the warmth of her through the thin fabric of my shirt, the subtle weight of her leaning into me. My heartbeat quickened, steady but strong, and I found myself holding my breath again, not wanting to disturb the quiet intimacy that had settled between us. Her hair brushed against my jaw, soft and faintly scented with something floral, and in that closeness, I could hear the even rhythm of her breathing. It was astonishing how much comfort such a small gesture carried, no grand declarations, no dramatic confessions, just the quiet reassurance of presence. I didn't move. I didn't dare. Instead, I let myself memorize everything, the glow of the lamp painting the room in warmth, the faint sound of dishes being dried in the kitchen, the stillness of the night pressing gently against the windows. Most of all, the feeling of her head resting against me, as if she trusted me enough to be still. My chest ached, not with loneliness this time, but with something closer to gratitude, and, yes, with longing too, though I didn't name it aloud. I knew the lines were complicated, blurred even, but that didn't make the moment any less real. When she finally spoke again, her voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Sometimes, that's all any of us need, she murmured. Someone to sit with. I swallowed hard, my throat tight, and nodded. Words felt unnecessary now. So we stayed like that, just sitting, side by side, her head against my shoulder, the night wrapping softly around us. For the first time in a long time, the loneliness inside me eased. Not gone, maybe, but gentled, softened by the weight of her promise. And in that stillness, I believed her. I wasn't alone anymore.